Cornel West, talk about what you saw Friday night. You were there in a church. You were speaking along with others. Did you expect to see what you saw outside?
No. I knew I was going to hear a powerful sermon by my dear sister, Reverend Dr. Tracy Blackman, and we heard one. We heard poignant words by Professor Jelaine Smith, and I had a few things to say. It was a beautiful moment, all colors, all religious traditions, Muslims, Jews, Christians, black, white, red, indigenous peoples, and we should never downplay the vicious attack on gay brothers, lesbian sisters, bisexuals, and trans folk. That was part of the chanting that took place the next day. But what happened was they held us hostage in the church. We could not leave after the service because the torch march was threatening the people who were there. And so in that sense, I said, boy, these neo-fascists, they're out of control. Where are the police? And who would think that our dear sister Heather, my dear comrade, who also was with IWW, it's very important. She was an organizer. She stood with us on Saturday. She paid the ultimate price, and many of us may have to pay that ultimate price.
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Matt. I teach at Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois. My research interests are media theory, media archaeology, Christian politics, leftist politics, etc.
I'm Dean, a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto. Matt told me to get some research interests last episode, so I guess I research religion and technology and also politics by virtue of doing this podcast.
Yeah, sick. Good brand building.
Thanks. It's a slow process, but soon enough, it's going to be in every store. Every big store.
Yeah, so one of my favorite podcasts is called My Brother, and Me. I've told you about this before. In their last episode, they actually had this segment where they talked about like what your trademark is. And anyways, one of the commenters on that podcast said that his trademark was wearing sunglasses and having mints. So
there you go.
Studying religion and politics is a little bit better than that.
Is it? I don't know. Wearing sunglasses and having mints is a lot more practical, actually.
I mean, honestly, you could do it all if you wanted to. You could wear sunglasses, have mints, and also study religion and technology. So
yeah, but it's already trademarked, so
that's true. It's by somebody else. No one else can touch it. Dang.
Just one of the challenges of being an academic. It's hard to get a good trademark.
That's right.
So we had an episode planned about violence, and we were just gonna talk about it. But then the events at Charlottesville happened, and we decided to redo the whole thing to talk about what happened there and just try to think through it as Christians on the left. So in case you didn't know or haven't heard about it, I don't know, because I guess you don't have access to a computer. A bunch of white supremacists descended on Charlottesville, Virginia last weekend to rally around the removal of this Confederate statue. And like a lot of ugly shit happened, but especially awful was when this fascist coward drove a car into a group of courageous leftists, injuring a bunch of them and killing Heather Heyer, who was only 32 years old.
We're going to get into this in a minute, but before we do, we're going to have dead air here where we encourage you to say a prayer or word in your heart in solidarity with Heather and all those who are injured fighting against white supremacy last weekend. So it was really troubling to watch as Christians really seem to struggle with how to handle the situation. The usual liberal responses about violence on all sides or whatever are one thing, but to give one example of Christians failing this moral test, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops released an initial statement that talked about the Charlottesville events as an attack on unity. And that was, I guess, obviously met with a lot of resistance on social media. But thankfully, on Sunday, after a day of prayer, they released a separate statement later on specifically naming white supremacy as the problem. So we thought we'd make an episode talking about violence and racism in that context and how Christians and the left have tried to think through exactly these kinds of situations. Amaryah Armstrong, our guest from a couple weeks back, put out a really important challenge on social media about all this, so we thought we'd open up the conversation with her thoughts.
White people, especially white Christians, who take nonviolence as their modus operandi, have yet to show me how such a nonviolent claim takes seriously the violence of white supremacy and the value of black life in the face of Nazi and white supremacist terrorism. Let me be clear. If some black folks want to be nonviolent in the face of white supremacist violence, I wholeheartedly support their self-determination. But if other black folks want to defend themselves, and other non-black folks want to be in solidarity with that defense through antifa and other modes of forcible resistance, the burden of proof is on white nonviolent moderates to show how their versions of nonviolence are consistent with their claims to value black life against the explicitly anti-black violence of Nazis and the baptism of that violence by the tepid responses of the state.
So it's not a secret on this podcast that we're not into the nonviolence thing for a variety of reasons, but we'll get into that later on. Before we do, though, let's just talk about like why this particular rally happened, what was going on. I don't know. Did you watch it kind of unfold on the internet, Matt, at all? Like, I was up late just watching it on Twitter, basically, so trying to piece it together.
Yeah, I mean, that was basically my experience, too. I watched people tweet about it on Twitter, and I saw some videos, and I saw lots of pictures, and I saw just lots of accounts from people describing it. It was actually, I mean, I don't know, Twitter is sometimes a bad medium to get news from. But watching it kind of unfold was really unnerving. Especially the night before when the white supremacists were walking through the streets with torches, that was really something to behold, I guess. It's such a spectacular like approach to politics. I mean, like walking through a dark campus with torches is something.
Right.
For sure, right? That, I mean, like that type of visual imagery calls back to I don't know, the KKK and other things.
Yeah, and even the whole aesthetics of it were just very weird and kind of surreal. Like a bunch of people were pointing out that they're all wearing Donald Trump's like golf uniform, which is so crazy, like so gross, first of all, but also a genuinely good symbol of white supremacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just take one moment to realize and recognize that the white supremacists here have ruined polo shirts forever. Basically, you can't wear them anymore. It's over. Sorry.
Yeah, that's also what's just so absurd about it is there's this real attempt to like build an aesthetic around white supremacy now. Because, you know, I don't know, bed sheets aren't cool anymore. Like, people know that they're gross. So coming up with something else. It's weird to think of somebody like, I don't know, Richard Spencer, the dapper Nazi, you know, deciding to put on, I don't know, like this ugly old golf uniform that his idol wears, I guess. I don't know. It's just strange to watch it all kind of form and coalesce into almost like an artistic movement, which is exactly what fascism has always been.
Yeah, on that note, this is kind of a funny thing, but also kind of not. Anyways, I saw this news story on the reputable news site AOL.com, where, the headline is great. It says, Macklemore no longer has the fashy haircut that neo-Nazis seem to love. And then, in quotes, got rid of it. So shout out to Macklemore for not having a dumb haircut anymore. What's up? Maybe we can kind of get over that haircut in general as a cultural moment and aesthetic of the alt-right. I think that's a good plan, everybody.
Yeah. I'll believe Macklemore when he also says he's getting rid of his polo shirts. Right now, this is the easy part, getting a haircut.
Yeah, but has Macklemore ever really worn a polo shirt? I am looking through pictures right now, and I see no polo shirts. So let it be. Oh, nope, there's one. Just kidding. Nice. Hey, just kidding. But it's from a thrift shop, though, so, you know, probably okay.
Donated by fascists.
Ex-fascists cashing in their wardrobe.
Yeah, I don't know. It's strange looking at this phenomenon because it is exactly the weirdest balance of extremely funny and extremely horrifying.
Yeah,
Funny
I
and
agree.
just how like so stupid it is. Like white supremacy is the dumbest thing, and like newer white supremacists, younger ones are especially just stupid. Like it's so dumb to like go out in an army of citronella candles, like warding away those mosquitoes in your polo shirts and your khaki slacks, and like pretending that you're fighting for your race's right to exist. Like that could not be a worse brand for like people that should stay on this planet.
Yeah, no kidding. Let me air a quick conspiracy theory, and I don't know if this is a good take or not, but something I've been like thinking about. So you said that they're like playing at fighting for their race. And it makes me think of this thing. I don't know. Richard Spencer said that the whole situation was was a success, and I'm trying to like think about how to interpret that, because like if you look at it, it was not a success. I mean, they got their butts kicked and they got like chased out. Like it didn't seem like much of a success to me at all. But I wonder like how much this is like the aesthetics of this, and like seeing it sort of performed live as like a visual event is a success insofar as that it shows like the power and legitimacy of a movement that is now all of a sudden there,
Yeah.
Like they might have gotten chased out, and we might count this as a victory for the left in some ways. But I wonder how much damage this has done just like in light of it having happened.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting because them getting pushed out and chased out and, having to deal with Antifa and all that kind of stuff, it helps them build the victim narrative that they need to kind of keep swelling and building that movement that they have where white people feel, whatever, attacked by other folks. And it's strange, too, how it ends up normalizing white supremacy light, I guess, by virtue of the president, saying something like, violence on all sides. There's some really fine people on both sides, right?
Yeah.
And I remember there was immediately after all these photos were getting shared, one of the guys who was identified, one of the white supremacists, was like, "I'm not one of those angry Nazis. Like that picture of me is not. It's really bad.
Oh,
it's not what
yeah.
I'm like." And it's like,
Yeah.
well, then don't go to a Nazi rally, like and that's kind of the idea. And I think that's maybe why Richard Spencer is right too. It builds this this really awful sympathy with white supremacists as like dumb kids or like average folks who just want to get theirs or something.
On that same note, though, too, I think this has been a pretty radicalizing moment for a lot of people who are just like left-leaning liberals. A lot of folks I've seen on Facebook have definitely taken a fun step to the left in light of these events too. So something to think about as well, I guess. I don't know.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It should be a radicalizing moment. You shouldn't be able to maintain, I don't know, any kind of liberal both-siderism in light of this type of situation.
Yeah, it's horrifying, though, the amount of people who can. I have not seen the Glimmer of Hope on my Facebook, which is mostly
really?
a cesspool of, like, I don't know. I don't post there anymore because it's essentially a magnet for, like, the worst of the worst. So, like, complaining about my Facebook statuses. I don't need that in my life. But it's weird to just watch the violence on all sides thing just come over and over and over in these statuses as though it's a moral high ground. Or even at a meta level, like the ACLU Virginia, they put out a bunch of tweets about how like they defended the right for all these people to get a permit to march.
Yeah, dude, the ACLU is actually bad.
Yeah, it's just like, what the hell? Like, and then they were sharing all these photos, of the resistors there who were who showed up to be like, this is bad, as though that was kind of the side that they had chosen. Like that was the moral, I don't know, energies that they wanted to associate themselves with. And it's like, well, but you put these people in danger by virtue of giving them a permit. Like, they're complicit in the death of people like Heather Heyer. And the fact that they can't recognize that is, I don't know, really terrifying.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think this is only, like, this is probably the worst of their sort of transgressions in light of, like, some other recent bad ones. I mean, like, they advocated on the behalf of Milo Yiannopoulos and stuff like that too. So it's not like this is completely out of the norm for the ACLU, but totally. This is just like the most egregious thing.
I mean, it is literally on brand for the ACLU that they're like, we're willing to defend anybody, whether you want to, murder people who aren't white or, I don't know, just be like an idiot in front of other people, like, we'll be there for you.
Yeah, I know. It's actually it's weird though. I mean, like, so the liberals that I've seen in my social media bubbles, who have taken a step to the left, actually haven't said anything about the ACLU, or maybe they just haven't even like recognized that they've done anything in with this. But maybe it's a good idea to help make known that the ACLU, I don't know, has a both-siderism ideology, and maybe that would help people even move further left in this situation.
Yeah, totally. Well, we should talk about something more encouraging, which was the presence of clergy at the actual rally.
Yeah, that was nice.
It was really nice. There was like a bunch of pictures kind of going around of them all in their, different whatever religious costumes, and that's very cool. Very cool, like counter aesthetic, really.
Yeah.
It's interesting to watch like a group of diverse interfaith people coming together in ways that represent their traditions visually to stand against, an army of Donald Trumps. That's like a great photo.
Right. I mean, they're the only one in robes there. How weird.
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
Yeah, that's true. It was great to see them there. It was great to see like the clergy alongside the like antifa guys.
Yeah,
and girls
no
and non-gender binary people. I'm using guys in sort of like gender neutral sense here, and maybe I shouldn't, but like I don't know. I'm from the Midwest. What can I do? Suffer through my stupid terms of speaking. So it was really interesting because I don't know, the clergy and the sort of non-violent religious protesters that are there. You would think that maybe they'd be annoyed by the disruptive actions of Antifa and the DSA and the ISW, or IWW and ISO and PSL. All the leftists were there. All the good leftist boys and girls and non-gender binary folks are out there doing their thing. And you'd think that like maybe that would be like annoying, right? That they were there and like kind of like being rowdy and defending folks against the Nazis, the white supremacists. But what is cool is that was not the case. At least right. Cornel West's account is really interesting. So Cornel West was there. Love Cornel West. He's good. He's a good guy. I saw him speak once in Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, and it was a very fun time. He's a great speaker and a fun philosopher.
Yeah, I feel like actually when I was like an undergraduate, watching a video of Cornel West is the thing that made me feel like, wow, I wish that I was as like smart and articulate as this person.
Yeah, I know, no kidding. I love watching videos of him. He's such a cool guy.
Yeah, exactly.
What's that one documentary, The Examined Life? Have you seen that?
Yeah,
there's like
I own that movie. That's how literally because of Cornel West, like that's how much I liked the interview.
Oh, nice. I love that movie. It's good.
Yeah.
Anyways, there's a cool scene with him in the back of a taxi or something, like interviewing Astra Taylor. I think that's her name.
Yeah. Or being interviewed by Astra Taylor.
That's right. That's kind of how I meant that. Anyways, it's cool. He has a really wonderful way of speaking, and he's an incredibly smart person. Okay, well, here's a clip of what Cornel West said about his experience with Antifa and the anarchists and other folks who were at this rally.
People that night who were responding to the Torch March were actually attacked with swung torches, pepper spray, and lighter fluid.
Absolutely. You had a number of the courageous students of all colors at the University of Virginia who were protesting against the neo-fascists themselves. The neo-fascists had their own ammunition, and this is very important to keep in mind because the police, for the most part, pulled back. The next day, for example, the 20 of us who were standing, many of them clergy, we would have been crushed like cockroaches if it were not for the anarchists and the anti-fascists who approached over 350 anti-fascists. We just had 20, and we singing This Little Light of Mine. You know what I mean? So that
Antifa meaning anti-fascists.
The anti-fascists, and the crucial role of the anarchists, because they saved our lives, actually. We would have been completely crushed, and I'll never forget that. Meaning what? Meaning that you had the police holding back on the one hand. So we couldn't even get arrested. We were there to get arrested. We couldn't get arrested because the police had pulled back and just allowing fellow citizens to go at each other, you see, and with all of the consequences that would follow therefrom. So in that sense, I think what we're really seeing, though, Sister Amy, is the American empire in decay with the rule of big money, with massive militarism, facilitated by the scapegoating of the most vulnerable of immigrants, Muslims, Jews, Arabs, gay, lesbians, trans, and bisexuals, and black folk. The white supremacy was so intense. I'd never seen that kind of hatred in my life. We stood there, and 9 units went by and looking right in our eyes, and they cussing me out and so forth and so on. And they lucky I didn't lose my Holy Ghost, to tell you the truth, because I wanted to start swinging myself. I'm a Christian, but not a pacifist, But I held back. But that kind of hatred, but that is just the theater. It's big money, it's big military, and the way in which this capitalist civilization is leading us toward unbelievable darkness and bleakness. And the beautiful thing is to fight back. It was a beautiful thing to see all the people coming back, but they had more fascists than anarchists, more fascists than fight back.
So Cornel West is like no stranger to showing up to protests and like getting arrested. Like that's kind of what makes him so cool, I think. But this account is really interesting because the normal theater of politics and activism like kind of didn't unfold the way he thought it would, right? Like he said that they were there to get arrested, but that didn't actually happen the way he thought it would. The cops were not playing that role today, or that day in Charlottesville. Right.
Yeah, the way he talks about the cops in particular, and I've heard other people who were there talk about it as well, is pretty unsettling because, the idea is that the cops weren't there to protect Antifa protesters or clergy people or people who, weren't white supremacists. They were there to protect white supremacy. And I don't know, that's like a full display and very important thing to note. Like, I know there was a picture going around of this black police officer, like, standing in front of a bunch of white supremacists, and liberals were like, isn't that so incredible that, this is what, like, our society's about? Like, this guy protecting these other people and their right to speak, even though they, like, hate him or whatever. And it's like, well, no, like, that's awful, actually.
Yeah, it's such a good analogy for thinking through people who think that, like, there's violence on both sides. Like, if you think that there's violence on both sides and that both sides need to be preserved and able to speak, like, you're doing what the cops did right there. Like, you're, like, propping up and protecting white supremacists.
Yeah, exactly. On purpose.
Yeah, right? Like, giving people who... I don't know, just like want to murder people of color, space to speak is a very bad plan.
Yeah, and space to like intimidate other folks. Like I know other people have talked about how at different protests and rallies, like Black Lives Matter protests, the cops are really quick to, make arrests when they can and basically, I don't know, put it down as quick as possible. Whereas in this situation, like Cornel West says, they just allowed it to escalate. Like he says, they allowed citizens to go at each other. Like that's not a good picture of what liberals think police are for, but a good picture of what police actually are.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there's another cool thing going on here too. So there's this really interesting, I guess, like juxtaposition between anarchists and antifa and like clergy members, where the clergy are there being like nonviolent, doing the thing that they do, singing this little light of mine. That's nice.
Right. Yeah.
But they're only like being protected by the anarchists and the antifa, who are like they're not singing this little light of mine and being like actively protecting them. That's like a pretty interesting juxtaposition between people who are committed to nonviolence and to people who are committed to defense.
Right.
Right. So like I don't know, how can we start parsing that out? Because that's like that's the tension that's like always at the basis of these episodes we do on violence between like nonviolent Christians and people who think that defense is necessary.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I think that pacifism as like a principle obviously has a long history in Christian thought, and that's cool. Like, that's a good thing, I guess. Like, I have a lot of respect for pacifists, so I try not to like disparage them, but at the same time, I think it's naive to think that pacifist tactics and nonviolent tactics have ever succeeded without some kind of violent armed wing somewhere else in the world, or like with them in one way or another. Like, there's a lot of work on how Martin Luther King Jr. probably wouldn't have made the gains that he did if it weren't for Malcolm X. You can say the same about Gandhi. Like, there were tons of armed wings in India ready to throw off British rule and
Marxist wings specifically.
Yeah, exactly. So it's telling that like these nonviolent examples get abstracted historically from their own successes, and this is a good way of showing how those two tactics work together, I guess. Because what's interesting about it is pacifism is a very good brand. We keep talking about branding in this episode, which is, I don't know, an under-examined thing, I guess, that I'm going to think about more when we're done. But pacifism is a great brand because people don't like to say that nonviolent tactics are wrong. But that's what makes this coalition so kind of important, because they can only be nonviolent by virtue of having that kind of protection. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened, I guess. So.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be said. I think that talking about this in terms of a coalition of tactics is a pretty good idea, and maybe like a learning moment for moving forward. That like it is a very good brand to have people who can be blameless in a situation, and then those people being protected by people who are willing to use violence in defense. Against white supremacists. I don't know. I mean, like, thinking of how that plays in the media, it just like looks very good. You can't discredit a leftist movement that has people who are like unwilling to fight being protected by people who are willing to fight. It's a really good type of like visuality.
And it's funny, like
media.
Even that language of blameless, right? It's like blameless in the eyes of people who watch it on television. That's like a really important point, even though it's wrong. Like, those people are not right, but it doesn't really matter. That's just how it is.
I know I've mentioned it before, but there's a really great book from Repeater Books by, I think she's a political scientist. Her name's Christiana Spence, and she has a book called Shooting Hipsters, and it's about, like, protest movements and movements of dissent, but from the perspective of public relations analysis, which is like super interesting, right? Because public relations is supposed to be like a really vacuous field that supports the capitalist class, and it is. But but thinking through like the optics of protest and visuality and how protest plays out with media is actually really important if you want to have a successful mass movement, because mass media is such. We're so post-mass media, right? It's like it's not something we even consider. Right. It's just part of our everyday life. So thinking through the ways that movements are televised and how they look is essential, which, I don't know, adds an annoying element of administration to planning protests, but I think is important nonetheless.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's exactly right. And I don't know, like, you study media, I study media. One reason that I got into media studies is because of the political questions that are contained therein. And I think it's important for leftists to continue to think about that. I mean, there are actually a lot of organizers that are very intentional, I think, about understanding how the media operates, knowing, how to use it, how to take advantage of it, and all that kind of thing. And in this case, this is just one more example of maybe how, like, religious people can participate in these kinds of media spectacles in a way that's good and builds like a good leftist kind of counter movement to the aesthetics of fascism or something. Right.
And don't get me wrong here either. I'm not saying that like me, an academic, like I'm not telling them like how to handle protest situations.
Yeah, of course.
Like they're already doing this. Like I'm just observing it, I guess. Right.
Right. We should say something too, just about Antifa generally. Just because I would suspect not everybody is familiar with it in the world, or like still wrestling with it and trying to figure it out. And they often, like, anti-fascists seems like it should be an uncomplicated thing that you would like and appreciate.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, anti-fascists are good just by virtue of what they're called.
Right.
But I think it's important to talk about how, like, the violent tactics that are used by anti-fascists, I'm not saying anything I guess we haven't already said, but it's combating a much deeper and more ingrained violence on the other side. Like, even if you're upset about violence or whatever, or that's not your bag, like, at the end of the day, like, white supremacy is qualitatively different in terms of its violent tactics, as opposed to Antifa, like, their bodies, their fists meeting Nazis' faces in space or something.
Yeah, qualitatively different. I mean, their political programs are 100% different. Like, one wants fascism and one doesn't, right? So it seems pretty clear. But it's weird how it's interesting because I think mainstream news sources have in the past and now even continue to try to mystify, like, the reason why Antifa is good.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, I don't know. There have been, like, lots of actually funny retweets of I can't remember the exact source, but it was like a brief history of Antifa, and it's like, did you know that they've been around as long as Nazis? It's like, yes, actually I did. I could have guessed that. As long as there have been fascists, there have been anti-fascists, so I'm not surprised. Awesome. Yeah, and it was also like, who is it that Antifa is trying to fight against? It's like, well, it's in the name, my friend. So
the fa.
Yeah, the fa.
Who are these fa?
Yeah. Quick side note shout out. If you guys haven't seen it, the DSA has, like, apparently an army of very good graphic designers, and there are so many good posters that the DSA has and kind of unleashed at the protests, the counter protests in Charlottesville. There's one that's really good. That's my favorite. That has a picture of, like, a cut up snake on it.
Yeah, that was also my favorite.
And it says always anti-fascist. So I'm gonna get that and get it printed out, put it on my office door. Like anyone cares, I guess, but it'll make me feel very good.
That, like, just occurred to me. Why aren't Christians totally taking advantage of the symbolism of, trotting down the snake when we talk about, like, brutal right-wing movements? It's just
I know, right?
It's just waiting.
It's just waiting. It seems obvious to make that connection.
Yeah, I think so. St. George and the Dragon suddenly becomes, like, a really great leftist symbol.
Yeah, no kidding. That should be a thing.
All right. Graphic designers out there listening to this podcast, you can have that for free.
It's yours, not trademarked. Our trademark is giving you good ideas.
That's right. So don't do it because it's ours. That's what we do.
But only that.
We will litigate on those grounds. If you give people good ideas, we're coming for you.
You're done. You're fired.
So violent tactics of self-defense necessary. I think that makes sense for nonviolent resistance. That is, like, necessary in any case. But at the same time, like, maybe we could talk about how liberating violence is, like, qualitatively different from white supremacy. We've been getting at that a little bit with respect to Antifa. But let's just, like, pull the rug out of the idea that violence is wrong on both sides in every case. When it comes to comparisons between, like, white supremacy and Black Lives Matter. I mean, first of all, Black Lives Matter is not strictly a violent organization, so that comparison is dumb and racist already.
Whereas white supremacists, the alt-right, is an explicitly violent organization, right? Like, I mean, you have that. Yeah. That has to be said.
Yeah, exactly. No matter whether or not they're, like, burning down property or punching people in the face, like, white supremacy is violent.
That's right. Their program is to like, eliminate people of color. I don't know. I don't know how. It doesn't seem like that's, again, a controversial point, but for some, I suppose it is. Yeah,
exactly. So, but maybe we could also talk about, like, okay, Black Lives Matter is not strictly a violent organization, but there are and have been and hopefully will be, I'm going to say that, armed struggles on the part of, oppressed peoples in the world, not least in the United States. And that kind of violence, even when, like, a riot does end up burning down a bunch of stuff in a city block or something, like, there's something about that violence that's also qualitatively different than the violence that's happening in white supremacy. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, here's an example. During I'm not going to say, like, Ferguson riots. I'm going to say Ferguson uprising. I think that's probably a better way of thinking about it. Yeah. Because riots have this, like, really negative connotation. We can talk about that in a minute. But during those situations in Ferguson, right? Like people were losing their mind that somebody set like a CVS on fire or something, right? Like liberals wringing their hands and like fainting at the idea that someone would damage property is like the dumbest thing. And it's a pretty common thing, I guess, for liberals to categorize property damage as violence. Right. Which seems stupid as well, because like it's not, if it is, it's like a type of violence that is to a lesser intensity, right? Like,
right. Hardly comparable to other kinds of violence.
Hardly comparable to like the, I don't know, ongoing like suffering of everyday life.
Yeah. Like the burning down of a CVS is not at all comparable to fearing for your life every time you get pulled over in a car or something.
That's right. That's right. There's a difference, of a very like an easy qualitative difference to make. I think. I don't know. Again, people don't like to see that. Liberals don't like to see that specifically because they love private property. But it seems pretty straightforward to me.
I think you're right.
I mean, on that point, though, I mean, I think like riots, uprisings at large are things that make liberals nervous and make conservatives nervous too, for probably good reason. But they are not violent in the same qualitative way as I think like the ongoing and underlying regime of white supremacy in the United States. Like, yeah. It might even be the case that like in an uprising, like what happened in Ferguson or in Baltimore or whatever, that might be like, that's a break from violence, right? Like that's a change in the regime of everyday violence, where all of a sudden the people who are oppressed are now like liberated for a moment in the streets. I don't know. That's something to actually think through.
Yeah.
It's a rupture in the fabric of the structural violence of white supremacy.
Yeah, that's right. We mentioned this on another episode a while back, but there's even like a Pope Francis says in one of his exhortations or something. It's escaping me right now, but I'll put it in the show notes somewhere so people can find it. But even he says there, like, yeah, nonviolence, like, I hope that's what people are up to, but at the same time, you can't expect to continue massive structural violent patterns and not think that these kinds of things are going to happen naturally. It's almost like he treats it almost like a thing that you should just kind of not be surprised by. And what you would be more surprised by is just waiting around and thinking that everyone's going to be totally cool with, like, having their lives threatened every single day and having no economic prospects and, watching all of their communities get systematically demolished by people who hate them and tell them that they're wrong. I think that's like a very good thing to say. Even like the Pope is nonviolent. He thinks nonviolence is great, but like he's willing to recognize that that's a totally different situation.
That's right. That's a pretty like Marxist insight from the Pope too. I think that he recognizes that like the structural violence that's bound up in our white supremacist capitalist society will sow its own seeds of like destruction in some ways. Like it'll start those things off. I don't know. People will revolt against them.
Oh, it's Evangelia Gaudium. That's the name of the document, by the way.
Yeah.
For those of you that want to look
sick. That's also the name of my my Catholic black metal band.
It's actually the name of my my new Gundam that I bought.
Yeah, sick. Great.
Evangelia Gundam. That's my new encyclical. my new tiny letter.
I mean, someone's got to protect the Earth from whoever the bad guys are in Gundam Wing.
It's also, I think, just important to connect those sites of struggle to other like historical sites of struggle, as though it's not like an isolated incident. And that's thing that I learned from a book that you told me to read by like your MA supervisor, Richard Gilman-Opolsky.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll just let you talk about it because it's your jam.
It is my jam. So there's this book. We mentioned it before on the show. It's called Spectres of Revolt. It's very good. It's the newest book from Richard Gilman Opolsky. You could go buy it and read it. It's also from Repeater Books. Shout out to Repeater Books. You guys should. We're not like doing any sort of like native advertising for them, but maybe we should be.
I would take it if they're gonna pay us to do what we're already doing for free. That's fine.
Yeah, that would be nice. I think that if they would even just pay us in free books, I think I would do it. So you guys, if you're listening, get at us. Okay. Anyway, so this is book Spectres of Revolt. There's a great chapter in it, and we'll post a link to it in our show notes because there's an excerpt online where you can read it. The chapter that is, I think, of direct relevance here is called "The Ferguson Revolt Did Not Take Place," which is I don't know, a fun Baudrillardian turn. If that is something that makes sense to you, you'll get the joke. If not, you're not missing anything. I don't know. I like Baudrillard, but come on, you don't need to read it. It's fine. Anyways, the point of the chapter is to talk about violence and talk about revolt as like a sort of philosophical event. But it's couched in this larger framework that suggests, that critiques the way that news media reports on, in terms of like, well, the Ferguson Revolt took place between the dates, I don't know, X and Y, right? And the Baltimore revolts took place during the dates X and Y, and like that these revolts have a discrete beginning and ending. And it's an important note to make that is not the case, because there are all types of subterranean, rhizomatic sort of connections that are underlying these revolts, right? That revolts don't come out of nowhere. They are hard to predict, for sure, like when they will happen, but they do just happen, and that they are interconnected. It's not like the struggle in Baltimore is different entirely from the struggle in Ferguson, or the struggle in Charlottesville is unconnected from the events of Ferguson or Baltimore, right? Like these things are connected rhizomatically, I guess.
Yeah, and they're connected precisely because there's not like an X and Y date, right?
Yeah, that's right.
These kinds of things that kind of bubble up and then simmer back down for a while.
Yeah, that's how it works. Weird, huh? So, anyways, the attempt to sort of relegate these movements to specific times and places, I think, is a mistake, a taxonomical mistake by mainstream media to obfuscate the larger questions being raised by these protests.
Yeah. Also, one thing I really liked about the way Gilman Opolsky deals with this, and I was looking at this again today, he talks about violence throughout that chapter in really interesting ways. But one thing that really kind of stuck with me, there's one point where he says, everyday violence, indeed, and one which it is necessary to confront as an overwhelmingly racist violence, like he's naming that as a significant problem.
Yeah.
And then he quotes a cool thing from Angela Davis. But at the very end, he says, in light of this everyday violence, which is, of course, not the only form of violence, revolt is patient, revolt is kind, revolt may even appear too moderate, too restrained, and too peaceable. And that, I don't know, it really like turned some of my brain gears going in a good way, I think. Because it is like that.
The chills.
Yeah, exactly. Like, revolt is extremely patient. I mean, people have to wait a very long time to finally get ready to do something. And then even then, like, the fact that we haven't toppled white supremacy by virtue of all these other movements shows that it is too restrained. Like, it is too peaceable, too moderate. And what's absurd is it's those kinds of revolts that people complain about as being too violent. Right, like that's the thing in the media, or are even suspicious that they're being violent a priori just by virtue of the fact that they're standing in the street where they don't belong or something.
Right, but rather it's like they've suffered violence for so long. Like this is them waiting. This is that's right. I don't know. I really, speaking of patience, I have less and less patience for like liberals who don't understand structural violence in this way.
Yeah.
Because like if you're wringing your hands about protesters using violence and you're not recognizing like the violence that you perpetuate and the violence that you live in, I don't know, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
You're
and
doing
not only
more
that,
harm than good.
you're doing the violence. Like, you're allowing
That's
it
right.
to happen and contributing to it.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's ironic to say that like people who wring their hands over violence on both sides are in fact contributing to the most overwhelming systemic violence that there is to contribute to.
I think so.
Action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, like, in case it needs to be said again, like, I don't think violence is bad. I just think you need to do it right. Like, be on the right side of violence. Like, commit violence against bad violence.
Yeah, I mean, like, violence is always okay. Here's like a dissertation or a master's thesis that someone can write out there. So here's a good idea. Brace yourself. Get your notepads ready. Violence is a technology, and it is not neutral, right? Like, violence can be used in different situations, but the ways that it is performed are not neutral. Right. If you do violence with the intent for the protection of people who are oppressed, and if you do violence like with the intent for self-determination of people, like, yeah, I don't know, that's probably good. Like, it's at least can be justified, right? Like, maybe not good,
right,
but it can be justified, and I think that is essential.
So I guess, like, if you're still not convinced about violence here, if you're still wrong, that is, we could at least say something about like the right kind of pacifism or the right kind of like nonviolence. So I was thinking about this because I own exactly one book by John Howard Yoder. And if you don't know who John Howard Yoder is, he is a Mennonite pacifist theologian. Also, a footnote, like, there's a lot of weird stuff about him sexually abusing his students, which is important, I think, to mention when people talk about Yoder. But we're gonna just bracket that real quick, rightly or wrongly, and talk about what he has to say about pacifism in the context of revolution. So I have this book that is just called Christian Attitudes to War, Peace, and Revolution. And it's a series of lecture notes that he gave. And at the end, he ends up talking a lot about liberation theology, its development, and the dialogue between, like, leftism, Marxism in particular, and Christians. And, like, he's obviously not convinced that they're right, because he's still a pacifist theologian. But one thing I really thought was good in that, in his discussion, is he ends up talking about how liberation theologians have definitely picked up on systemic violence in an important way. And he says, like, any pacifist kind of worth their salt is going to find ways to build coalitions with violent Christians by virtue of understanding that even though they disagree on that tactic or whatever, pacifists kind of have no right to, like, tell oppressed people what to do, I guess. And I think that is a pretty good, important point. Like, if you're going to be a pacifist, at least be one like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's pretty profound. Yeah, I mean, we kind of see this sort of thing play out with the clergy in Cornel West, and their relationship to to antifa and to the anarchists and the other folks that are out there defending them against white nationalists, right? It's like that type of coalition that's right there in front of us. Yeah,
exactly.
So Yoder is right on this idea that there should be a coalition, but he is super wrong about his analysis of violence. Like, that's where I have to get off that train. But, like, I don't know. I think that that's fine. Like, clergy members should show up, and if they feel led to be nonviolent, they should. And then they should also be very thankful that there are going to be anti-fascist protesters there to protect them.
That's right. Yeah, and this is something I think you see even in, some of the foremost, like, pacifist people and theorists, like people always pull up the example of someone like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right, who, like, really wrestled with the problem of violence and, like, basically thought of himself as, like, a pacifist, nonviolent person, but still plotted to kill Hitler because, like, how could you not? Like, he wrestled through that problem. And then people like Martin Luther King Jr., right, like, there's a famous quote where he says, like, he would never condemn riots because riots are the language of the unheard. And I think it's important for pacifists in particular to remember that it's not like a moral high ground on which you can, just sort of put down other people. That's like basically the liberal game, I guess.
Yeah.
But like an engaged pacifism understands and recognizes why violence happens and understands that it's not actually all the same.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if an engaged pacifism, I think, is like the key there, right? Like if you're there willing to work with people who are being violent, then like I think good. If you're like a pacifist who's chilling on the Christianity subreddit talking about how bad violence is, then you're really serving you're serving liberalism, you're serving white supremacy. So engaged pacifism is something I could hang with for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And it's there's a place for it, I guess, in the struggle. Maybe that's the most important thing for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a huge place for nonviolent pacifist tactics. And that place is alongside other ones, basically.
That's right. So at the end of the day, I think that pacifism is obviously insufficient, as Charlottesville demonstrated, and as Amaryah cautions us at the beginning of this episode, conversation thing. But if you can't seem to get over Yoder, and you can't get over nonviolence as an important tactic, here at least, it's important to note that pacifists can't tell oppressed folks how to liberate themselves, that's for sure. But they can show up. They can show up and be on the side of the people who are right, and that's very good. That's something to consider. Okay, so maybe that's where we can just kind of leave this conversation off, and we'll probably pick it up again 1,000 more times in the life of this podcast. But we'll stop here then and just kind of give a plea for a more creative Christian leftist solution to white supremacy that's more than just like, I don't know.
Making a Facebook status.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get more creative about it. Let's find solutions and ways to struggle against white supremacy. And let's do that. Let's do that thing. Thanks for listening to Magnificast. If you don't already, you should follow us on Twitter, like our Facebook page, subscribe to us on iTunes. God, do that. Leave us a review, and we'll probably talk about it on a future episode. You can also support us on Patreon, which is something that we really appreciate. This month, all of the Patreon money is going to go towards like the medical funds of the people injured in the Charlottesville attack. So, I don't know, you can give us your money to give to somebody else, I suppose. But it also helps support this podcast and pay our hosting bills. So that's really nice. We'd love your support. All right, thanks for listening.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord.